All right, before we begin our second half, just to let you know, if any of you are not on our CLASSICOPIA email list and want to get on that, that is in the back there. So we thank you. We can let you know about all of our concerts. We usually do concerts once a month, although I'm going to be back here next week doing a concert, so hopefully you'll come back. This concert was supposed to be in February, so I had already planned a wonderful program next weekend. We're doing Totally Tango with a cellist from Brazil, and it's going to be arrangements of tango music for cello and piano. And I'll talk about the history of tango, which actually is very similar to the history of ragtime. They both, tango started in the brothels of Buenos Aires and sort of made its way around the world right around the same time as ragtime. So it's some really fun music. Unfortunately, the church can't take us in next weekend, so there's only two chances to see us. Friday night we'll be at the Old South Church in Windsor. But then on Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock, we'll be at a wonderful home in White River Junction, Norwich area. Dr. Andy Bauman has got a wonderful home with a great piano, and I think there's actually going to be some tango dancers coming to that and dancing on the side as we go. So that could be kind of fun to watch. So again, go to classicopia.org and you can sign up for those concerts. Totally Tango next weekend. And then at the end of April, I'll be back up here the last weekend doing a concert with violinist Rosie Watson. Some of you may know her. She grew up in the Hanover area. I played with her when she was about 12 years old, and now she's off freelancing around the world. She actually lives in Providence, Rhode Island now. She's famous for playing in bare feet. She never wears any shoes, and that locks her to the ground because she's liable to float off. She's very short, small child, but fantastic player, lots of excitement. And so we're going to be doing music of Mozart, Tchaikovsky, Bartok, and then the César Franck Violin Sonata, one of the great romantic pieces of music. That's the last weekend in April in a few different places. So again, sign up if you're not on our list. All right, we thought we'd begin the second half with some solo work, and the first piece we're going to play is actually a fantasy for violin and piano by Florence Price, but we wanted to give a good challenge to Frances. So she's going to play this on the cello. Not sure that's been done before, but it's a nice change for this piece. This is, again, another wonderful African-American woman composer who's a little bit coming into her own now. Actually, the Baltimore Symphony, where I live, just did her piano concerto, and it was such a great piece of music. People are rediscovering Florence Price, but she was born in 1887 in Little Rock, Arkansas, and she would ultimately be the first African-American woman to have a symphony performed by a major symphony orchestra. The Chicago Symphony in 1933 actually performed as part of a competition her first symphony. She wrote 4 altogether. Her father was the only black dentist in Little Rock, Arkansas, and her mother was white of Mexican origin, and she grew up showing incredible genius at an early age, just like Samuel Coleridge Taylor. She actually had her first piano lesson when she was 3, and her first performance in public at the age of 4. Published her first piece when she was 7, and then she actually graduated valedictorian from her high school class when she was 14 years old. So this was a really smart girl, and she actually was accepted into the New England Conservatory of Music, one of the first African-American women to go there, although she actually applied, did not say, she's a very light-skinned woman, and she said she was actually Mexican as a way to not sort of show her race there when she got there. But George Chadwick sort of recognized, he was the president of New England Conservatory and a composer himself, and she came up to major in piano and organ, but he heard some of the works that she had composed, and she was writing more in a European vein, trying to sort of emulate that style, but he had also heard some spirituals she had arranged, and so he sort of encouraged her to blend that European style, romantic style, with the spiritual style, and that's a lot of what her music contains. She would become the head of Clark University's music department in Atlanta, and then she ended up marrying a lawyer, and they moved to Little Rock, Arkansas, but there were several lynching incidents there while they were living there in the 1920s, and so they ended up, like many African Americans, making the great migration north to Chicago. And when she gets to Chicago, unfortunately her marriage falls apart, and she is forced to sort of take care of her 2 young girls, and so she actually takes a job playing organ at the silent movies at the theater there in Chicago. She also starts writing some popular songs songs under the pseudonym of VJ. So if you have any old records of VJ, that's really Florence Price. And then she started teaching a young woman named Marion Bonds, who would ultimately become a very good composer herself. But Bonds was well connected in Chicago with some important people like Langston Hughes and Marian Anderson. And when they heard some of Florence Price's music, they encouraged her to get it out there as much as she could. And so she enters this competition along with Margaret Bonds in 1933 for all composers of any race around the Chicago area. And she got first prize and Bonds got second prize. And the prize for that was to be able to get their symphony performed with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra on June 15th, 1933. She would ultimately write 4 symphonies, 3 piano concertos, about 300 different works. And we're still discovering some of these works. Many of them were not published. Most were not published. And in fact, in 2009, in a house in St. Anne, Illinois, outside of Chicago, where she must have lived for a while, they actually discovered a giant trove of Florence Price manuscripts in an abandoned house there. Who knows how long they've been there, but they're sort of still finding these things, and hopefully we'll get more and more published. But she knew it was going to be hard to get her music played by symphonies. And there was, she actually wrote a letter to Serge Koussevitzky of the Boston Symphony, enclosed her symphony, and she wrote to him, "To begin with, I have 2 handicaps, those of sex and race. I am a woman with some Negro blood in my veins. Knowing the worst then, would you please be good enough to hold in check the possible inclination to regard a woman's composition as long on emotionalism, but short on virility." So she was very sure of herself, and her stuff really is quite virile and powerful, but also lyrical. Marian Anderson, that wonderful singer, actually sang one of her spiritual arrangements at the famous Lincoln Memorial Concert on Easter Sunday in 1939, and there were 75,000 people in attendance hearing her music. So we hope that she'll get heard more. Again, this is her Fantasy, probably written in around 1935 when the first symphony was written. And again, it has this sort of rhapsodic European feel with the cello in the beginning, kind of soloistic, but then soon we move into a more sort of African-American spiritual feel to it, and then they sort of get combined at the end in a wonderful finish. So here's the Fantasy by Florence Price. pieces are actually both written by William Grant Still. This is a composer that I became familiar with, God, it's almost 30 years ago when I was fortunate to win the Artistic American Ambassador competition along with a violinist named Tim Schwartz after I graduated from Peabody. And we were sent on this wonderful 2-month tour of the Middle East and Southeast Asia, places like Pakistan and Syria and Laos and Thailand. And our job was to play some American music. And we found this piece, the Suite by William Grant Still from 1943. And we were just blown away by the power of it. And we started playing it all over the world. And everyone just fell in love with this piece. And his daughter is, I think, still alive. She's out in Arizona. She's the one who, publishes all his music, and every time if she sends it out, she says, "You gotta let me know when you're playing this piece." So I keep telling her all the times we've been playing this piece, and I remember writing to her when we went on that tour, and she was so excited to hear her father's music made it all the way to Syria and Pakistan. He was a very well-known composer in his life, actually. He was known as the Dean of African-American Composers, and was the first in a lot of different things. He actually beat out Florence Price by just a few years with his Afro-American Symphony. That was the first symphony by an African-American performed by a major orchestra, the Rochester Philharmonic, again in 1930. He was also the first African-American to conduct a major symphony orchestra when he conducted the Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra in 1936, which is fairly early. It took 20 more years until he became the first to conduct in the Deep South. He conducted the New Orleans Philharmonic in 1955. He was also the first to have an opera performed by a major opera company. That's Troubled Island with a libretto by Langston Hughes. So really a powerful composer, but his music has not withstood the test of time, and that's only because I think it's not programmed enough. And so my job is to make you go listen to William Grant Still. You can hear his music on YouTube. Go and listen to it. It's really powerful stuff. His mother he grew up, he started playing many instruments. He could play all the string instruments, clarinet, flute, and oboe became his kind of major instrument. His mother really wanted him to be a doctor, so he started studying that and then immediately switched to music. Went to Oberlin College in Ohio. Again, that was one of the few schools that took in African Americans at the time. And then when he graduated that, he went to fight in the World War I with the U.S. Navy, came back in about 1918, and he went down to Memphis, and he actually started working with W.C. Handy, who's known as kind of the father of the blues. They would go around and listen to people singing the blues and try to write it down and codify it so this oral tradition would not be lost. So he was very influential in that first blues stuff. He then heads to New York City in the 1920s, where the Harlem Renaissance is going on, and he lives there with all of these great writers and artists and musicians. He starts playing music there. He played in the Paul Whiteman Orchestra for a while, maybe played with Rhapsody in Blue, I don't know. But he was also in the first all-black musical called Shuffle Along in 1921 by U.B. Blake. He was playing oboe for that. And then he ultimately made his way out to Los Angeles, where he started writing for films. He actually did, what did he play? He did a 1936 film called Pennies from Heaven, starring Bing Crosby. He did The Lost Horizon in 1937, and a couple other ones. So he had kind of a fascinating career. In talking about his symphony, the Afro-American Symphony, the first symphony he wrote, he said, "I knew I needed to write a symphony, and I knew that it would be a very American work, and I wanted to demonstrate how the blues, so often considered a lowly expression, could be elevated to the highest musical level." And he also employs the blues in this piece, again, this incredible suite from 1943. But what's also fascinating about this piece, there are 3 movements, and each movement is based upon a different work of art, because he was friends with all of these artists in the Harlem Renaissance. And I happen to have the artwork here that you hopefully can see. The first movement is based upon Richmond Barthe's statue of an African dancer from 1933. This was actually the first sculpture by an African American to get into the Whitney Museum of Art. I was just there recently and I saw it. It's a great piece. But in the first movement, William Grant Still basically brings this statue to life. It's sort of whirling, non-stop excitement, except in the middle there is a sort of slowdown and we get a little bit of the blues, and then it sort of whirls itself back up to a really exciting conclusion. The second movement is a gorgeous spiritual-based movement. This is based upon a crayon drawing by Sargent Claude Johnson of a mother and child. Some beautiful chords, seventh chords and ninth chords, jazz chords that you'll hear in that movement. Excuse me. And then the last movement is, I think, too short, but it's based upon a sculpture by a woman sculptor, Augusta Savage, named Gamin, or Street Urchin, from 1929. And in this movement, you'll hear a little bit of boogie woogie in the left hand as he starts sort of playing a walking bass line with that. So we hope you enjoy the Violin Suite by William Grant Still. Here's Mr. Emmanuel Borowski. All right, so we're actually going to finish now with another piece by William Grant Still, not of the same kind of music. This one actually is kind of a travelogue of the Americas. It's called Miniatures. There are 5 little miniatures from different parts of America, both Central America, South America, North America. And again, he wrote this for flute, oboe, and piano, but we don't have a flute, oboe, and piano, so we're doing it for violin, cello, piano. I think it works pretty well. And he wrote these for a conductor named Sir John Barbaroli, who was an English conductor who had come over to New York in the 1930s and 40s, conducted the New York Philharmonic for a while, got to know William Grant Still. Barbaroli's wife was actually a very good oboe player too, so I think they got along together. They actually traveled a little bit together, William Grant Still and Barbaroli, and then the Barbarolis took a huge trip across the South Americas and Central Americas, and this was dedicated to that trip, sort of highlighting different folk songs from those areas they visited. So the first one, it's called I Ride in Old Paint, and he describes each tune beforehand as a little bit of a writing. He says, "This cowboy tune comes from Santa Fe, New Mexico. It was sung by a rider who so loved his horse that he begged that on his death his bones should be tied to the horse, and the two of them set wandering with their faces turned westward." So that's I Ride in Old Paint. And then we go down to Mexico, a piece called Adoloride, and he says, "Lacking newspapers, the Mexican natives outside the cities invented the corrido, corresponding to the European ballad, to convey to others the news of heroic deeds, accidents, love affairs, and so on. Adoloride is such a news song, coming from the Bajo or low hot country around the state of Guanajuato. It tells of sadness over being betrayed by an ungrateful woman." Then we head down to the Deep South, and again, a spiritual tradition, but a little bit more down and dirty kind of spiritual. It's called Jesus is a Rock in the Weary Land. And he says, "This Negro spiritual differs in character from those that are generally arranged for singers. Here it is given a rhythmic treatment to correspond to the way it might have been heard in some of the more primitive churches of the area." And then we move on to Yaravi, which is from Peru. He says, "In the Quechua tongue, the language of the ancient Incas, Yaravi means lament. Known in Peru as a song of long ago, this poignant melody speaks of the absence of a dear one." And you'll hear kind of imitation of one of those pan flutes that they would play down there. And the last one, I think you'll recognize this song. It's called "A Frog Went A-Courtin." And he said, "There are many versions of this lilting tune, each one varying with the particular singer. The composer first heard it in a little village close to the mountainous section of Kentucky and was told that it came from Virginia. Other regions also claim it as indigenous to them. The basic song is said to have been in continuous use for more than 400 years. So here's a little travelogue of miniatures by William Grant Still. you. Thank you all for coming. We'll see you next week.